Sencha is the quintessential Japanese green tea, and accounting for over 60% of the tea grown in Japan, it's by far its most popular style. But how does Sencha get from the fields to your cup? Hi, I'm David, and today I'll be talking about how Sencha is made. Today, in addition to me, you'll be hearing from Azuma Terako of Azuma Tea Farm, Yoshida Masahiro of Yoshida Meichaen, and Morisaki Ryo of Morifuku Chaen. Since Sencha making is such a complicated process, I decided to split this topic into multiple parts, so today we'll cover everything from the cultivation of the tea all the way up to the harvest. Most videos that cover Sencha production start from the harvesting, but in fact most of the flavour that ends up in the final product is already determined by the way that the tea is grown and how it is picked. So with that in mind, some of the topics I'll be touching on today are terroir, cultivar, fertilizing, trimming, shading, harvest method, and harvest time. Before we get into it, I'll quickly define what Sencha actually is. Briefly put, Sencha is a type of Japanese green tea made from unshaded first flush leaves, which are steamed to prevent oxidation, then rolled and dried, with the final rolling giving the tea its distinctive needle-like shape. Sencha roughly translates to simmered tea, and this was originally used to distinguish loose-leaf tea from matcha, the powdered green tea that was the predominant style at the time. Sencha in its recognizable form was developed by Nagatani Soen in 1738, and with a few more developments since then, we arrive at modern Sencha. All of the farmers featured in our video today are located in the greater Uji area, which brings me to my first topic, terroir. Terroir is a term borrowed from the wine industry and roughly refers to everything to do with a given growing region, including the soil, the altitude, the climate, etc. Classical tea growing knowledge brought over to Japan from China says that tea grows best on the side of the mountain where the soil can drain the water away naturally, and the fog and mists and the mountain itself can provide some natural shading for the tea. Higher altitudes like mountains also make the tea grow slower, meaning more nutrients make their way into the leaves, and the cooler atmosphere means that fewer insects arrive to eat all the leaves. Over the 800 or so years in which Japan has had a tea industry, certain areas have become particularly well known for being well suited to growing tea. Since early days, tea from Uji has been the most desirable, especially when it comes to matcha. Once a land covered in tea fields, today the town of Uji has little space left for farming, so most of the tea labeled as Ujicha or Uji tea is actually grown in the surrounding regions, such as Wazuka, Ujitawara, Shirakawa, etc. While Uji is by far the most well-known, it is not the largest tea-growing region. That honor falls to Shizuoka. The tea-growing land in Shizuoka can roughly be separated into two areas. There are the mountainous regions of Honyama, Kawane, and Tenryu. These mountainous regions have long been known to produce very high-quality tea, especially Sencha. While these mountainous regions produce the highest quality tea, they have their drawbacks. The high degree of slope and the high altitudes of the fields makes it hard for farmers to bring their equipment up the mountains, which makes farming harder and makes large-scale agriculture impossible. As a result, there is an emphasis on quality over quantity, which makes the tea all the more special. In addition, there are the flat regions, such as Makinohara and Kakegawa. Because of the flatness of these regions, they are more suited to large-scale commercial agriculture and produce the majority of Japan's tea. Continuing south, we reach Kagoshima at the southern tip of Kyushu, and this is the fastest growing tea region in Japan, by which I mean it produces more and more tea every year, not that the tea grows faster. With that being said, in my opinion, the best regions for Sencha are the classical mountainscapes of Uji and Shizuoka. Part of what makes these areas so good for growing tea is their soil. There's something special about Uji's soil.
Usually, 5 years
Mm.
ね、
Mm.
でピッキングする
Yeah.
3年で取れそうなぐらい
Wow.
それだけソイルがパワフル
そうですね。Soil science is complicated, but it mostly boils down to the composition of the soil. This determines what minerals are present for the tea plants to draw from, but also how well water can drain from the soil.
ちょうどいいその粘土質と水はけのいいちょうどいいぐらいの土に作らないとお茶は美味しくならない。
ああ、なるほど。
で粘土質すぎても水はけが悪くて呼吸しにくくて酸素が回らない。そうすると木が弱る。 私たちは、肥料を与えるとかき混ぜる。そうすることで、いい土ができる。そうですね。
Once you've picked where you want to grow tea, you'll have to choose which plant to grow, which brings me to my next topic, cultivars. In Japan, the vast majority of tea plants are not actually grown from seeds, but rather propagated via cuttings. This means that tea fields are full of genetically identical plants, which are known as cultivars, or hinshu in Japanese. To be clear, these are all still Camellia sinensis, the tea plant, and most of the tea cultivars in Japan are of the Camellia sinensis variety, to make things more complicated. By virtue of being genetically identical, all of the tea plants of the same cultivar will grow in the exact same way and they'll all taste identical. Today, cultivar tea, or hinshu-cha, accounts for about 97% of tea grown in Japan. But before the invention and propagation of cultivars, tea plants were grown by seed, like every other plant. This is known as zairai, which means native, although a better translation would be seed-grown. Both cultivar tea and zairai tea have their pros and cons. Teas grown from cultivar are much easier to manage and can be produced at a much larger scale because all of the tea plants behave the same way, they all sprout at the same time, and can all be harvested at the same time. However, as a monoculture, they are more prone to disease. Conversely, zairai, growing from seed, tend to develop much deeper roots and are much hardier and can live for much longer.
Last year, so 2 or 3 weeks, no rains. So it's easy to get damage. But that has root on
Deep roots, yeah.
on the deep roots. Yes, that is
Hardy, tough.
hardy, tough. Yes. The tea trees from seeds
Yeah.
are very strong. They will survive a long time. I think more than 200 years, 300 years. But the cultivar, so is cannot cultivar tea trees cannot survive longer.
35年.
35年 years. Yeah.
However, despite some of these benefits, zairai is quickly disappearing in Japan, with only a handful of farmers continuing to promote it.
Already no zairai, no zairai farm, so nobody asked me. I think 8 or 10 years ago, everybody gave up.
When it comes to cultivars, there are about 100 or so that grow in Japan, the most common being Yabukita. This is a very well-known and trustworthy cultivar, but because of its ubiquity, some people find it a little bit boring. When choosing a cultivar to grow, the farmer will have to take into account the local climate, how well the cultivar responds to cold weather and frost, as well as its resistance to certain insects and diseases. For example, one cultivar, Saimidori, buds earlier than Yabukita, which means it can be harvested sooner, put on the market sooner, and potentially sold at a higher price. However, it is less resistant to frost damage than Yabukita, which means that all of the crops could be destroyed by a bad winter. Because of this, farmers tend to grow a variety of cultivars, reducing their risk and diversifying their crop. One of the most popular cultivars for Sencha, and one of my favorites, is Okumidori, which is what I'm drinking here in Asanagi, which is a Okumidori Sencha from Azuma-chan. So these fields are Okumidori. These are going to be made into Sencha, which is our Asanagi from Azuma Tea Farm. Unfortunately, the local deer have taken some of the harvest from this year. Now that you've chosen your tea plant, you need to take care of it. This brings us to fertilizing. Because the factory processing of Sencha is so simple and transparent compared to other types of tea, such as Chinese green tea, oolong, or black tea, the majority of the tea's final flavor must be present in the plant before it gets processed. For modern Sencha, this relies mostly on fertilization, getting a lot of nutrients into the soil and therefore into the plant. While most tea farmers use a combination of synthetic chemical nitrogen fertilizers and organic fertilizers, strictly organic cultivation is becoming more and more common, even among farmers who aren't certified as organic.
I use only organic fertilizer. Mainly use canola seed.
Regardless of the type of fertilizer, tea plants must be fertilized year-round, with the most important fertilization occurring towards the end of winter and the beginning of spring, just before the tea plants begin to sprout their new buds. Part of growing tea up in the mountains is dealing with the local wildlife. There are a lot of insects and other many-legged things crawling around the tea fields, but some of these are actually good for tea cultivation.
虫が中にいるはいる。
Mm-hmm.
いるけど、その葉っぱ食べる虫と、その虫を食べる違う虫がいて。
Sorry. When talking about organic cultivation, there are a few ways to deal with these pests without resorting to chemical pesticides.
一番茶畑、収穫する。夏とかは暑いでしょ。虫がすごく多い。
そうですね。
だから夏は消毒薬しないと茶取れへんから。だから今無農薬で栽培するのを最優先に。だから一番春の茶畑大事にとって。
One of these is to only harvest the spring picking or ichibancha. This means you're not picking tea in the middle of the summer when all the insects are about, so you don't have to worry about the pesky bugs. Additionally, this means you can trim back all of the leaves after you're done harvesting in spring, and there are no leaves left for the insects to eat. Another upside to this is that picking only once a year is less stressful for the tea plant, meaning the new shoots that crop up every spring are full of even more nutrients. As you might notice when looking at pictures of tea fields in Japan, all of the tea bushes are arranged into neat little rows of hedges. These tea hedges are the most popular way to grow tea in Japan, as their even surface makes it easy to harvest the tea mechanically. This style of growing is called uneshitate, and these hedges can take on various shapes, some being semicircular, rounded shrubs, some being a little more square. The shape of the tea bush is usually determined by the harvester being used to pick the leaves. This style of trimming or shaping also keeps the tea at a manageable height, so the farmers can walk through the fields and assess the leaves relatively easily. If tea is left to grow naturally, it can get really tall and really unmanageable really quickly. While uneshitate can produce some very high quality teas, the best teas are left to grow a little more naturally in a style called shizenshite, or natural tailoring. When grown like this, the tea plants tend to grow a little more vertically and have an irregular shape. This means that they can't be picked by machine and must be picked by hand. Additionally, because these naturally tailored bushes have fewer buds per root, more of the soil's nutrients gets concentrated in each bud, meaning the tea picked from these plants is more flavorful. Before mechanical harvesting, shizenshite was the only way to grow tea plants, and is preserved today in the highest quality senchas, but is also used to grow really high quality matcha. The shape of the tea bushes also affects what type of shading can be used on them. Now you might think, shading? What do you mean shading? You just told me that sencha is by definition picked from unshaded tea leaves. And this is where Japanese tea gets complicated, because while that is technically the definition, a lot of sencha grown these days is actually shaded, especially tea from Uji or sencha from Kagoshima. Unlike kabusecha or gyokuro, which are shaded for 2 to 4 weeks respectively, sencha that is shaded is only shaded for a few days, maybe a week max. In Japan, there are two main ways you can shade a tea plant, either by directly putting a cloth over the tea bush, blocking out the sunlight. This is called jikakabuse, or direct shading. Or you can build a sort of shelf over the tea plants and drape the cloth over this. These shelves are called tana, and if you're using a black cloth, it is called kandesha, but traditionally you would use wood, bamboo, and straw in a method called honzu. Because the highest quality senchas are picked from these naturally tailored bushes, they must be shaded using a shelf, as the shape of the bushes means you can't just drape a cloth over them. But for the majority of sencha, which is grown in the hedge style, you can shade the tea directly. This is much cheaper and easier. Not all tea from Uji is shaded. This one here is actually unshaded. While the mechanics and science of shading will be covered in another video, the main effect is that shaded teas have a little more umami, a little less bitterness, and a deeper, greener color. As I said, sencha can be shaded for up to a week before harvest, but deciding exactly when to harvest the tea is one of the biggest decisions a farmer can make. As I mentioned, things like terroir and cultivar can affect when the tea bush will sprout. For example, tea grown in the south of Japan, in Kagoshima, will sprout earlier than the tea grown in Uji. But even within one region, local climate can affect the way the tea sprouts as well. For example, in Uji City, the tea will sprout about a week earlier than in Wazuka. Farmers must also decide whether they want to prioritize quality or yield. Generally speaking, after a certain point, the quality of the tea shoots will begin to decline. However, as they grow larger and larger, the actual amount of tea that you can pick from them, the yield, will go up. Therefore, if you pick earlier, you'll maximize quality, and if you pick later, you'll maximize yield. Most sencha is picked somewhere in the middle to strike a perfect balance between quality and yield. Once you've decided when to pick your leaves, now you must decide how to pick them. In Japan, there are two main categories of tea harvesting, manual and mechanical. Manual tea harvesting, or hand picking, is called tezumi.
Tezumi の方が静かですね。
集中して。これこそ手摘みや。
あ、はい。
手摘みティーや。
はい。
Hand picking is reserved for only the highest quality teas, as it is really slow and really labor intensive. A highly skilled tea picker can pick about 1 to 3 kilograms of tea an hour. However, such skilled tea pickers are in short supply these days. I myself can pick some tea, but I'm not very fast.
積み方にもいろいろあって、今積んでもらってるのは、折り積み。
折り積み。
茎も葉っぱもね。でも、long time. Big tea leaves. しごき積み。
しごき積み。
you know?
The vast majority of sencha, though, is picked by machine. As with hand picking, machine picking comes in multiple styles. There is the riding style, which is what we call in English a tractor, or the handheld style, which is a sort of specialized hedge trimmer. The riding style is mostly used on flatlands where you can actually drive a tractor, but in the majority of these hilly areas, such as Uji and Shizuoka, all the tea is harvested using a handheld machine. This is usually a 3-person operation with 1 person on either end of the machine, sort of hovering it over the tea plant, where the little blades will cut the tea at exactly the height that they want to. A 3rd person will be behind them, carrying a bag that will hold all of the freshly harvested tea shoots. Compared to hand picking, which again only yields 1 to 3 kilograms an hour, machine picking is much more efficient than hand picking, producing up to 250 kilograms an hour from one of these handheld machines. However, machines aren't as discerning as hand pickers, and they will just chop everything off, which means more stems and twigs will end up in the tea and must be sorted out later. Additionally, machine harvesting can't be used on the shizen shitate, or naturally tailored tea bushes I mentioned earlier, which means they must be used on the hedge type tea bushes. Regardless of which tea harvesting method you choose, you'll end up with a giant bag full of freshly picked tea leaves ready to be taken to the factory, which will be the topic of part 2 of this series. In the meantime, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.